Hello, and welcome to the Hey Boomer Show, the show where we believe that we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. Today, we're going to talk about a documentary called Lives Well Lived. And we're going to talk about what makes a well-lived life. My guest today, Sky Bergman, captured stories of older adults living full and meaningful lives in their later years. Their stories are about perseverance, the human spirit, and staying positive during great personal and historic challenges. Sky's original inspiration for the documentary was her grandmother, who turned 103 and traveled out to California for the opening of Lives Well Lived. And I started to think about who some of my inspiration has come from. And it's no doubt that it has come from both of my parents. My father, he lived full out until he was not able to anymore. But even as he was nearing the end of his life, he was working on a play about Irving Berlin, which my mother actually continued to work on and finished and produced at the retirement home where they live. So he certainly was an inspiration to me. And my mother, who got her PhD in her 60s, she was active in the League of Women Voters, in AAUW, in Rotary, and she ran an Alzheimer's support group. And it's only in the past few years that she has slowed down, really since the pandemic. So I have been definitely inspired with the work I'm doing with Hey Boomer by both of my parents, as Sky was inspired by her grandmother. But before I bring her on, I wanted to talk to you about one of our sponsors. Her name is Christine Baumgartner. And Christine is a relationship coach. In fact, Christine is my coach for working on how to date at this new stage of life. She also works with people who are in relationships, who have, gotten into a relationship in this second or third act of life, and some of the challenges that we bring with the baggage that we bring into those relationships. And I have to say, Christine has been very helpful to me, and you can check her out. Her website is called theperfectcatch.com. And the first thing you have to do is learn about yourself. So check out Christine at theperfectcatch.com. I also have a question for you. Do you know what is next on your life's journey? My What's Next coaching program will guide you through the transition process from retirement or the end of whatever career you have been into, whatever is next and right for you. And we all, as you know, need help now and then. So I just wanted to tell you what a couple of people have said about the program. One person said, instead of anxiety, I'm looking forward to easing out of my lifelong career in technology, hanging up my frequent flyer, guest, and renter status, and do work I want to do when I want to do it. Another said, I was able to look within myself and understand what is really important to me as I make this transition. What will fulfill me after my time in the workplace is complete, and the baby steps needed to achieve retirement success. She very kindly says, I highly recommend Wendy and the What's Next workshop. So if you're curious about what's next for you, drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz, and let's set up 20 minutes to have a little complimentary conversation, talk about where you're at, where you want to be, and figure out what might be next for you. That's wendy@heyboomer.biz. So Sky Bergman is an accomplished, award-winning photographer And Lives Well Lived was Sky's directorial debut in the filmmaking industry. Sky is a professor emeritus of photography and video at Cal Poly State University in San Luis Obispo, California. She has 2 short films about intergenerational connections currently on the film festival circuit, and she's working on a feature-length film that is a celebration of love. Sky was recently named a Code-Generate Innovation Fellow, joining an impressive group of 14 other social entrepreneurs with co-generational solutions to some of today's biggest problems. These 15 inspiring social entrepreneurs bring older and younger people together to address racial inequality, climate change, social isolation, and more. Sky is fascinating, wonderful. I'm excited to bring her to you. So let's bring her on right now. Hi, Sky.
Hi, how are you doing, Wendy?
I'm doing great. I'm so appreciative to have you on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, so I mentioned your grandmother.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about how she inspired you and how this all got started with Lives Well Lived.
Sure. So I should say that I've never done any filmmaking before this film. My grandmother, when she was 96, she came out to visit me for the first time from Florida, and I live in California. And for the next 4 years, she spent the month of August with me, which if you've ever been in Florida in August, it's a good time to get out and be in California. And she was an amazing cook. And like any other amazing cook, they never write recipes down. My grandmother is no exception. And I realized that we would go to the farmer's market on Thursday, and Friday we would be cooking all day. And I really wanted to capture her cooking and capture those recipes more than just writing them down. I wanted to hear her voice, and she would say, it's a pinch of that and a handful of this. And I really wanted to see that. And so I started my first foray into doing any video work, which was to capture my grandmother cooking in the kitchen. That was what bonded us and brought us together from the time that I was a young kid. And so we did this series of cooking videos called Cucina Nonna, which means grandma's kitchen in Italian. And it was just so wonderful to do that with my grandmother. I'm so glad that I have that as a record for myself and my family and other people to take a look at. And when she was getting ready to turn 100, I went back with her to Florida, and she was still working out at the gym. She started working out when she was 80. So it's never too late to start something new, including working out at the gym. But I thought I better film her because nobody's going to believe that at almost 100, she's still working out at the gym. And I asked her for a few words. I said, Grandma, can you give me a few words of wisdom? And she said, oh, words of wisdom, be kind and live life to the limits. And I thought, wow, this is, she's such a role model for me. And I was looking at approaching 50, which is a big mark, I think, in people's lives when they approach that half century mark. And I was looking around at the media and not seeing any positive role models of aging. And this was 10 years ago. So at that time, all you saw really were the very depressing movies about aging, or in the advertising world, what you saw were all the anti-aging creams and everything that you could do to stop the aging process. But let's face it, the one thing we all have in common, if we're lucky, is that we age every day. Otherwise, we are not alive anymore. And
That's right.
so we really, I really wanted to highlight for myself, really, it started as a very personal journey. I wanted to find other people out there like my grandmother who were living very full and meaningful lives, because I wanted to find those role models that I just wasn't seeing in the media. And so I spent the next 4 years interviewing 40 people with a collective life experience of 3,000 years and asking them all the same set of questions, and really putting all devices away and really just intently listening for 4 years. And what a gift that was. And as a result of that, I was able to put together this film, Lives Well Lived, which is unbelievably to me is now airing on PBS. I mean, my first film, and it did well in theaters, and now we're on PBS, and just what a dream come true. And it all started from a love of my grandmother.
It's a great film. As I was telling you before we came on, I was watching it again this weekend because I just wanted to refresh. And there's so many wonderful lessons in there. And you start the film by asking them, what is a life well lived?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of answers, what did you learn from that question?
No. Well, one of my favorite answers was that it was from Barbara Dreyfus, and she says, "Life plays with you, doesn't it?" And I think sometimes, and you have to allow for, that being flexible, being having your attitude is like I think one of the most important things in how you live your life. I think also just being kind and living in the moment. I think those are things that are part of a life well lived is really learning to really treasure each and every moment. And when we reflect back on our lives, it's not the sometimes the big events, but the little things that are really meaningful to people. And so I think remembering that on a day-to-day basis, that sometimes you can do something very small, but can seem very monumental to somebody else when you're being kind. I think it's just, my grandmother had a motto to always be kind. And I think that that's the biggest piece of advice of how to live a well-lived life is just to be kind.
Yeah, be kind and be present in the moment. That was interesting to me that came out with several of the people in the show. And mindfulness, we didn't talk about mindfulness back in their generation. They're mostly the greatest generation. So that was really interesting to me, that they're recognizing the importance of that, to be present. Yeah,
Mhm.
so I really enjoyed that. So you had never done a film before. What was that learning process like?
Well, we have a motto here at the university that I teach at. I teach at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California, and the motto is learn by doing. So we expect that our students are going to learn by doing. And I would say that I was living that motto as I was creating the film. I've always lived my life saying, instead of saying why, I say why not. And I always try and have my decisions based on curiosity over fear. And so I think that that was really important, that I follow my passion, even when it may seem like a strange road to take. If I follow my passion, it has never led me in the wrong direction. And so I just knew that I had to do this. I didn't know I was going to be making a film when I started this process. I thought I was going to be doing a web series and just a series of interviews. I just knew that it was something that I had to do for myself. And as I got deeper into it, I realized that I really needed to make a feature film. It's probably good that I didn't know what I was getting myself in for at the very beginning. But I think if you put one step in front of the next, one foot in front of the next, you can take something that's very monumental and break it down into smaller tasks, and you get one task done after the next, and then you get to this big goal. And that was pretty much what I did. I also was lucky enough that I was able to hire people to help me with things that I didn't know how to do. And I also think that I am one of those people, if I don't know how to do something, I am not afraid to show I don't know how to do it. I'm not afraid to ask for help. And so I reached out to, in the very beginning, to other filmmakers and asked them a lot of questions. I said, how did you do this? And what advice can you give me? And I'm always looking for advice on how to do something better, and to surround myself with people that are doing what I want to be doing, but already doing it and doing it better, so that I can rise to the occasion and do what they're doing. I also, at the time that I started working on the film, Apple had this plan where you could get one-on-one help from people at the Apple store. And so that's what I did. There were three guys at the Apple store who I call my Apple gurus. And they knew about video backwards and forwards. They got a kick out of me coming in and asking lots of questions. And I was in there as much as I could be to learn from them. I was like a sponge learning from them, learning the verbiage. I didn't even know how to Google to ask the right question because I didn't even know
Right.
the terminology. And, again, being willing to say to somebody, I have no idea, but this is what I want to do. Can you help me get there? And they were instrumental in helping me get to the place where I now understand the language of filmmaking and was able to do it.
Yeah. I totally understand that. When I started making this podcast, I was listening to all of the talk from the podcasters, and I had no idea what they were talking about. So it's a learning process, but if you're not afraid, or even if you are a little afraid and you still do it afraid, but you ask questions and you figure out how to get the help. I think that, and you said the passion, you have to have the passion. Yeah.
Yeah, look,
So
I was not a good interviewer when I started, and I look back at my initial interviews, and I think, oh my goodness, I had this list of questions that I had spent like 4 months working on. I realized, okay, I work at a university, and I took out people that worked in the social sciences department. I took them out for lunch, and I said, I'm working on this project. What are the questions I should be asking? Here's what I'm looking at. What would you add to this list? And so I really worked on refining those questions. But I remember the first couple of interviews that I did, I just felt like I had to go down the list of questions, and I wasn't asking the follow-up questions. And thankfully, the people that I interviewed let me go back and redo the interviews many times. But you learn by doing. Learn as it's
you
like
do.
anything else. You practice, and doing an interview, the more practice you have, the better you get at it. I'm sure the same is true for you. Your first couple of podcasts probably didn't go as smoothly as the ones now. And I think it's just, you learn as you go. And certainly I think being open to that and open to recognizing that if you get some feedback sometimes from people, that's really helpful to maybe, improve and do a better job the next time.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now you are a filmmaker and you've got 2 more films out in the circuit. Can you tell me about them?
Yeah, sure. So the one film is called Forever Voters, and it came about because I was trying to find a time to go to lunch with one of the people that's in Lives Well Lived, one of the film stars in Lives Well Lived. Her name is Evie Justison. And she was saying how busy she was, and she's, running from hither and yon. And I said, well, what are you doing? She said, well, I'm part of the League of Women Voters, and we're going into high schools, and we're talking to the high school seniors about the importance of voting and why their vote really matters. And we're encouraging those students to register or pre-register to vote. In California, you can pre-register if you're 16 and above. And I was so inspired by that because in the Lives Well Lived film, my grandmother talks about having been born at a time when women didn't have the right to vote.
Right.
And she remembered women marching to get the right to vote. And so in our household, voting was really a privilege that you didn't take for granted. And so she and my grandfather used to work the polls every year when I was a kid. I remember that vividly. And so when I heard about this initiative that the League of Women Voters was doing, I was so inspired that by the end of the week, I was in the classroom filming that process and also filming the students talking about what they wanted to vote about, because I think there's a real misperception that that age group doesn't care, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And I think that there are some issues that are very important to them, and they really just, you could see them light up when this group of older men and women came into the classroom and really took them seriously and told them, your voice matters, and we want you to be able to vote. We care that your vote matters. And for many of them, it was the first time that somebody other than a parent or a teacher had talked to them about voting and the importance of voting, and really that they were talked to as an adult in that way. And it was such a magical moment to see that. So that's one film, and I'm still working on that project in terms of.
So let me just repeat the name of that, Forever Voters.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at it. It's on the web. There's a website, forevervoters.com, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, .com. Yes. And I did forward it to our local league here because I thought it was such a great idea.
Yeah. So we're trying to grow that from a very local campaign here in San Luis Obispo to a national campaign. And so that was one film that I worked on, and it's been in the film festival circuit, which is great because it's getting the word out about that project and about what we can do to help encourage young voters to register to vote. And we don't just want them to register to vote. We really want them to become lifetime voters. And one of the things that I read when I was doing the research for the film is that if someone votes in 3 out of their first 4 elections, they're more likely to become a lifetime voter. So it's really important to get those young students out there voting and understanding that their voice and their vote really matters. So that was one film that I've worked on. And the other film, which I've done a 5-minute short, which has been in film festivals and won awards throughout the country, is called Mochisuki. And it is the Japanese tradition of making mochi to bring in the new year. And that also came about because of somebody in my Lives Will Live film, Susie Edo Bauman, who, for those of you that haven't seen the film, she was incarcerated during World War II because she was part of the Japanese-American internment. And we talk about that in the Lives Will Live film. But she was also talking to me about this mochitsuki ceremony. And I said to her, well, can you tell me more? And it's such a beautiful ceremony. And it was happening a couple of weeks after I interviewed her, and she invited me to come, and I was just hooked. It's a beautiful ceremony that brings generations together, sort of like I came together with my grandmother in the kitchen. I love this idea of passing down tradition and love and recipes and wisdom through food, through that connection through food. And the ceremony that I went to, there were over 150 people that come from up and down the West Coast, and you take this very particular rice and you cook it up, and then they pound it to make these mochi balls. And it's a beautiful ceremony. And that's going to be on the extended version of that film will be on PBS in May of 2024. So
and how do you spell that, Sky? Mochitsuki?
Mochitsuki is Mochitsuki. It's a long word, but it just means
so it is one word. Mochitsuki.
I've seen it spelled as two words, and I've seen it spelled as one word because it's a Japanese word. So I think it depends on who's translating it.
Right. Yeah. Indeed. So yeah. So and I've seen the trailers for both of those, the Voters one and the Mochitsuki one. So yeah, very, very good. So you've also now been nominated to do some work with Cogenerate, and I think, if I understood, you took this film, The Lives Well Lived, which you all have to see. I'm telling you, everybody who's listening now, you've got to see Lives Well Lived. You can see it on PBS. You can buy it on Amazon, on the website Lives Well Lived. You can see ways to watch it. But somehow you were working with a intern, or I think, who kind of got you thinking about how to bring this to younger generations. Is that right?
Well, I can tell you a little bit, about that. I had a student that I was working with, because anytime I did an interview, I tried to bring a student with me so that they could learn about the process. And I had a student, his name was James, and he went on the interview with me for Lucky Louie, who, for those of you, again, that haven't seen the film, he's hilarious. He's just a really funny guy, one of my favorites. And we finished that interview, and James and I went out to lunch, and James said to me, wow, I never knew that older people could talk so much. And I, having grown up in a very intergenerational household, I had 4 generations when I grew up. My great-grandmother was still alive until I was 19 and lived with my grandparents, and I lived with my grandparents. So we had 4 generations in the house. I knew that older people could talk a lot and had lots of conversations with older adults, including, my grandparents, my great grandmother, my grandparents' friends. So, I was kind of taken aback by that. And I said to him, well, don't you have an older adult in your life? And he said, yeah, I have a grandfather, but we don't really talk that much. And it just so happened that it was right before Thanksgiving weekend. And I said to him, I want you to take this list of questions that we just asked Lucky Louie, and your homework is to take these questions and ask Lucky Louie these questions, or ask your grandfather these questions we just asked Lucky Louie. And he came back from that trip, and he was just beaming from ear to ear because, I think he wanted to get to know his grandfather better, and his grandfather really wanted to know him better, but they just didn't know how to start the conversation. And I think that that's super important to figure out where that entree is. And on our website, there's a place where you can share your stories, or you can download the questions that I asked. And I would say, the biggest regret that people had who were, that I asked in the film, was not asking a question of somebody that had passed away. So don't let that happen to you. Use those questions. Use me as an excuse to ask these questions and have this dialogue. So that was my first experience of realizing, wow, there is something here in terms of connecting generations and how we can do that. Because certainly I was doing that as I was, connecting with all the people that I interviewed for the film. And then I had an experience where the film was released in theaters, and there was a student that went to go see the film who was in a class here at Cal Poly called the Psychology of Aging. And she reported back to her teacher, Professor Sarah Bartlett, and said, "Oh my God, I saw this film and you should see it." And the professor went to see it and then realized that we both worked at the same university and reached out to me and said, "Wow, I would love to meet with you and let's figure something out." And so we came up with a program that we work with, and now it's running with high schools and colleges across the country, but I've been documenting this one here, where we show the film to older adults and to students. And then the students and older adults use the questions that I had formulated to get to know each other. They spend 3 or 4 sessions that they meet with on their own doing that. And then there's a big wrap party at the end. And it's really a lovely program because it's, it's connecting generations and breaking down those stereotypes about ageism, one story and one connection at a time. And let's face it, ageism is in both directions. We as older adults, many of us have stereotypes about younger people and vice versa. And so the more that we can do to connect people from other generations together, the better off that we will be. We really need that. Our world needs healing, and we really need to do a lot of connecting people so that we don't have the other, that we are all an age diverse society living together, rather than saying, "You're from that generation, so I'm not going to talk to you," thinking, "Wow, I had this really great interaction with somebody from that other generation. And I have the friend from another generation. And now I'm more open to seeking out friendships of all ages."
Yeah, and there's a lot more work that's starting to go on in that direction. So I'm excited
Absolutely.
about I'm excited about what you're doing with the intergenerational work. Are you finding that people are recognizing similarities? I mean, what are some of the learnings you're seeing?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that I have heard is that, the students and the older adults realize that they have far more in common than differences, and that really the only big difference is their age. And I think the students, even more so than the older adults, are kind of blown away by that because they realize that the older adults are going through a lot of have already gone through a lot of the same things that they're going through now. I think one of the joys and one of the reasons that the program works so well is that showing the Lives Will Live film first, in the film, there's a lot of firsthand accounts of things that happened, and you see people at a younger age. And so the students start relating to that in a very different way and seeing older adults as having had this whole life history, and they can start realizing, okay, they were my age at one point as well. And so there creates a bond that there wasn't there before. And so I think it's really about noticing the similarities over the differences. And it's so wonderful to see that. We work with Senior Planet, which is part of AARP, when we do it virtually, which we're doing this quarter and we did during the pandemic. And I will never forget, there was one young student who came on and said that through this project, it was the first new friend that they had made during the pandemic. And I thought, what a
Wow.
great gift it was that during the pandemic that they were able to make a new friend who is an older adult. Because I think that, if you looked at what was going on during the pandemic, the two groups of people that were really suffering the most, that were having the most loneliness, were older adults and students. And so to bring those two groups together was really quite a gift.
Well, I think it's also, like you said, they recognize that there are less differences, but I think it's also learning the history, like if they spoke to somebody like your grandmother, they learn about the women's suffrages movement, or they speak to somebody that was in the Japanese internment camp. In return, we're learning about what some of their struggles are, having faced the pandemic, or I guess 9/11. They're probably a little older now, but there have been certainly struggles that they've faced. And I think trying to understand each other's history probably helps build those bonds as well.
Absolutely. And, I'm reminded of when I was doing the filming for the Forever Voters film, I actually had a very unique experience in that I was at a high school, and the principal came on and said, "We're getting a lot of phone calls from parents today that something's, there's some chatter that something's going to happen in the school today. Nothing's going to happen. Please stop spreading those rumors." And that was a bit odd. And then we went back to what we were doing. There was a Friday. There was a big football day. We went to there was a big football rally. And then when we came back, there was a fire alarm that went off. And the students didn't move because they didn't know, is this a fire alarm or is somebody pulling the fire alarm and there's going to be a school shooting? And that is just something that I never faced in my lifetime at school. And so, I think it's really easy to say as older adults, oh, well, the younger generation, they're not dealing with this and that. No, they're dealing with very different things and
Very different things.
climate change and school shootings. And, there's so many different issues that are on the table for them. And it really hit home for me on that day. And in fact, there actually was a fire and we had to get out of the building, but it was that pause, that very long pause where the students just didn't know what to do, that I found incredibly compelling. And, and really brought home the differences of what they have to face in today's world.
Yeah, it's amazing. And some of the research I did, I was expecting gun violence or climate change to be like the number one issue these kids are facing, but mental health, because of all of these things coming together it's pretty remarkable. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. From some of the people in the film, tell me about some that have really inspired you.
Oh, I'd like to say that my grandmother left me the greatest gift, which is 40 new grandparents, because I just feel like I have these wonderful, wonderful people that I can call on. And some of them have passed away, but, I had lunch with Evie earlier this week. I'm having dinner with Paul Wolf next week. I feel very close to all these people, and I forever am thinking about their words of wisdom. And I think that especially during the pandemic, when you hear their stories, they are really stories of getting through difficult times and really of resilience. And I think that there are times in our lives where we all have a bad day, but I think of some of their stories and it puts it into perspective. And for me, at least, and it gives me a really nice attitude adjustment and a big shift in my day. And I think that for me, one of the most impactful people that I interviewed, I love them all, but one of the most impactful things that I learned was when Evie Justison talked about, she read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And she talked about her takeaway from it was that there are many times in your life that you cannot control the things that are happening around you, but what you can control is your attitude about how you deal with those things. And for me, that is a really good reminder. And there are days when I know I need to give myself an attitude adjustment. And it's really because of listening to Evie, because I then read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. All those things just, it opened me up to different ideas. And I also think Blanche Brown really reiterated kind of living more in the moment. And I think that when at least for me, when I was younger, I was so caught up in doing my job and everything. Sometimes you forget about just taking a moment to pause and really appreciating where you're at that moment. And I think that I do that more consciously now, that I really try to slow down and prioritize having that moment to just enjoy. And I go for a walk every day, and I religiously carve out that time, because that's my time to just enjoy the moment and to really enjoy the day.
Well, you need that, Sky. You are doing so many things and you don't have much of a staff. Is that right?
That is correct. I have a couple of students who are wonderful, who are working as interns for me. I did, though, I will say that I had some really good people working for me on the film, and to give them credit, I had two friends of mine who decided that their titles were associate producer, Catherine Trujillo and Gail Force, and they were like my rocks when I was working through this. I did have an editor, Randy Barros, and I think you need to find good people to help you out. I'm also really lucky to have a very good supportive partner who he is right there with me, making sure that I'm doing okay. And I think that he's okay being in the background, but everyone needs to have that supportive group in their lives, whether it's a partner or friends, or I think that's really important. And I think that the other thing that I learned from the film is that there were really three things that people had in common. One was having a good support system, whether it was friends or
Mm-hmm.
family. That's what made me think of it. And the other was this attitude adjustment that Evie talked about, seeing life as a glass as half full rather than half empty. And then third, which I think is really interesting, is everyone in the film had a sense of purpose, and also realizing
Right.
that sense of purpose could change over time. I think that, that leads back to like when I was younger, I was running around and my sense of purpose was I had two stepkids, raising my stepkids, getting tenure at the university. I had a different sense of purpose than I have now. Now my sense of purpose is about connecting generations and doing what I can to have those intergenerational projects happen. And that's really where my passion lies. And I think no matter what age you are, it's really important to have that sense of purpose. And I think a lot of people, when they retire, that's why some people have problems, because they think they're going to retire and everything's going to be great, but they haven't done the next step of like, what is my
Right.
sense of purpose now that it is not tied to my job? And
Right.
I think many times when we describe ourselves, at least when we're working, we describe ourselves by the things that we do and the job that we have, rather
Right.
than who we really are as people. I mean, it's just easier and more shorthand to be able to say, oh, I'm a professor. And,
Right. Right.
not to really go deeper into who you are as a person. And so when that's gone, then how do you describe yourself? And so I think, that is a really important thing to keep in mind as people come to that point in their lives, or any point in their lives, is really thinking about how do you figure out what your sense of purpose is. And everyone in the film had that, whether it was Lucky Louie making mozzarellas for his daughter's deli. For those of you that
That's right.
haven't seen the film, he was a pediatrician. Everyone here in San Luis Obispo who is of a certain age had him as a pediatrician. So they love it. But he reinvented himself when he stopped doing that and started being a mozzarella maker. Or,
That's right.
Paul Wolf, who was an architect and taught architecture at the university, and now still in his 90s is going about to different high schools talking about his experience during World War II. He survived and got out of Germany. Is Jewish and got out of Germany, and talks about discrimination. And, everybody has a different sense of purpose. And I think that is the drive that keeps people going and keeps people not just going because you want to thrive. And I think,
Thrive.
to pull a quote from a good friend of mine, Dr. Roger Landry, you want to live long and die short. You
That's
really
right.
want to live out loud, live full, and die quickly.
Yep, absolutely. And that's what my whole show is about, and my whole coaching program is about, finding
Mhm.
that purpose. And some people get a little overwhelmed, but you're right. The show is about these people. They had a reason to get up in the morning,
Mhm.
and they were excited about their days and what they were going to be doing. So it was, yeah, it was a beautiful lesson. So what's next for you?
Well, I am retired from teaching, although I'm teaching part-time through an early retirement program, so I'm semi-retired. But I'm writing a book about my experience with the film, and also interviewing people that are doing really interesting work connecting generations. So there's one whole chapter that's devoted to that, so that hopefully people will read the book and be inspired to create some of these intergenerational projects in their own community or educational institution. And working on this Mochizuki film, the extended version of the film that's going to be on PBS. So, and then just having fun. You have to have in your life the time for enjoyment and fun, and it can't all be about work. So my priorities at this point are take care of myself. That means doing yoga every day and walking every day, eating well. I have a great partner and a great family, making sure that I spend time with them. And then the last thing is I do my work. So it goes in.
So it's a total shift of the priorities from when you were younger, which is,
Uh,
that
yes,
happens.
I think I always took care of myself because I had an illness when I was 35, and I think that when that happens and you're young, you realize that you cannot take your body for granted, and that you really have to take care of yourself. It's sort of that metaphor of you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first so you can take care of others. And I think that sometimes is seen as selfish, but in fact, it's very selfless to be able to, so that you can be present when you need to be if something happens. And I've
Right.
experienced that as well. So making sure that you take care of yourself first so you can take care of other people. That's really an important lesson to learn.
You have shared a ton of lessons with us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let me tell people how they can reach you. You can reach Sky if you want to email her at liveswelllived@gmail.com. You can also check out the website, which is a huge resource of materials. As she said, the questions that are there, where you can leave your own stories, how to watch this film, just a ton of information. And that website is lives-well-lived.com. So please do that. Please watch the movie, and let Sky know how much you appreciate the work that she's doing. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And thanks to everybody that tuned in. And if you want to really start off your day right, if you go to the website, there's a Film Stars page, and I have my favorite quotes on that page. So if you're looking for inspiration on a daily basis, you can go there and find some great inspiration. And Wendy, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I really had a great time. Thanks so much.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you came. So let me just remind you of a couple of things before we go. If you're interested in talking about what's next for yourself, as Sky was saying, finding your purpose in this next chapter, drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. If you're interested in finding out more about the relationship coaching that Christine Baumgartner does, you can reach her at theperfectcatch.com. Just fill out a little questionnaire there and schedule a time to talk to her. And next week, my guest is Ken Dolan Del Vecchio. Ken is a leader in the field of mental health, and he now has a podcast called The Pet Loss Companion, and also a book about that. So if you are a pet owner, if you have ever lost a pet, you know how difficult that can be. So we're going to talk to Ken about grieving the loss of a pet and, how to move on from that. And I like to leave you all with the reminder that you can live with courage, you can live with passion, and you can live with relevance. And remember, you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.